The city park was a chaotic symphony, a vast green space that seemed to absorb all the noise from the surrounding streets and then amplify it tenfold. Kids were screaming with a joy that was somehow both delightful and absolutely deafening. A bunch of teenagers nearby had a portable speaker blasting some hyperfast song, the bass thumping like a panicked heartbeat. Dogs were barking their heads off, their leashes getting tangled as they struggled to say hello to every single person walking by. For Annuli, who was lugging around a small, beat-up canvas bag heavy with her art supplies, it was a special kind of torture. She had a very specific vision for her painting today, a quiet, sun-dappled scene of the old stone bridge that arched gracefully over the pond. But every single spot she thought might work was already taken up by someone else's noise, someone else's life happening right there. She walked further in, her steps becoming more determined, moving away from the popular areas where families were having picnics and friends were tossing frisbees around. The grass was a little taller here, the path not quite as paved. The grand old oak tree was her last hope, a giant whose branches created a canopy of shifting shadows and light. But as she got closer, her heart just sank. The space underneath it wasn't empty at all. A boy was sitting there, his back leaning against the rough bark, and he was cradling a guitar in his lap. Annuli let out a soft sigh of frustration, about to turn around and retreat, admitting defeat for the day. But then she just stopped. A sound, thin and delicate as a spider's silk thread, made its way through the wall of park noise. It was a melody from his guitar, a series of notes that were slow and thoughtful and deeply, profoundly sad. It wasn't loud, but it was so clear and so full of feeling that it seemed to push all the other sounds away, creating a bubble of silence all around him. It was the quiet she had been searching for, but it was a quiet that held a story inside it. She stood there frozen, her paintbrushes completely forgotten, and just listened. The music felt like a gray, drizzly day, like the feeling of missing someone you couldn't quite put your finger on. It was beautiful, but it made her chest feel tight and achy. Without really making a conscious decision, her feet started to move, carrying her closer to the tree, pulled in by the invisible thread of the song. She was so focused on the music that she didn't even see the large, twisted root breaking through the soil. The toe of her sneaker caught on it, and she stumbled forward with a small, startled gasp. Her canvas bag flew off her shoulder, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The sound of a metal paint tube clattering against a rock was shockingly loud in the intimate space that his music had created. The melody stopped right then and there. The boy's head snapped up, his dark eyes wide with surprise. He had a quiet, handsome face with hair that fell softly across his forehead. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Annuli's face flushed with heat, a wave of embarrassment so strong that she felt dizzy. This was it. He would think she was rude or clumsy, or maybe both. He would pack up his guitar and just leave, and the beautiful, sad song would be gone forever because of her. But instead of looking annoyed or anything, he just watched her. His expression was more curious than angry. The silence stretched out, becoming heavy and awkward. Annuli knew she had to say something. Anything. An apology was the obvious choice, the polite thing to do. But as she looked at him sitting alone under this massive tree, the ghost of his melody still hanging in the air, the words that came out were not, "I'm sorry. That was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard," she said, her voice sounding much firmer than she expected. "It made my heart feel quiet." The boy blinked in surprise. He was so used to people just walking past, so used to playing for the squirrels and the birds in the sky, that a direct compliment like that was a complete shock to his system. A slow, rosy color crept up from his neck to the tips of his ears. He looked down at his guitar, then back up at her, and a small, shy smile touched his lips. It was a tiny thing, that smile, but it completely transformed his face, warming up his eyes and making him seem a little less alone in the world. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice just as quiet as his music. Seeing his shyness made her own confidence come back a little. "I'm Annuli," she said, bending down to gather up her spilled art supplies. "I was trying to find a quiet place to paint, but everywhere else was just so loud. Then I heard you." "I'm Sua," he replied carefully. setting his guitar aside as if it was made of glass. "It is usually quiet here." He gestured to the spacious patch of grass under the tree. There is room for two if you want." And that was how it all began. Annuli spread out her old blanket, unpacking her tubes of paint, her brushes, and a small jar of water. Sua picked up his guitar again, but he didn't play the sad song this time. He played something softer, lighter, a background melody that felt like a gentle breeze. She started to paint, her brush strokes finding a rhythm that matched the strum of his strings. They didn't talk much at first. He would play a new chord progression, and she would glance over and give a small, approving nod. She would mix a particularly vibrant color, a splash of crimson or a dash of gold, and he would watch, fascinated by the certainty of her movements. Annuli soon learned that Sua spoke more with his music than with his actual words. A cheerful tune meant he was happy she was there with him. A slow, experimental melody meant he was thinking hard, working something out in his head. She, in turn, showed him her world through color and shape. She pointed out the way the light hit the leaves not just as green, but as 100 different shades of yellow and blue and brown. He listened intently, his eyes seeing the world in a completely new way. The afternoon sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of oranges and purples. Their first meeting was coming to an end. As they both packed up their things, a comfortable silence settled between them, a stark contrast to the awkwardness they had started with. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Annuli asked, slinging her bag over her shoulder. The painting of the bridge was only half finished. Sua nodded his head, holding his guitar case tightly with both hands. "Yes," he said, "I will be here." "Good," Annuli said, giving him one of her big, warm smiles. "Me too." She walked away, back towards the noise and the hustle and bustle of the world. But the quiet melody stayed with her, humming softly in her memory. Under the old oak tree, Sua watched her go. A feeling was blooming in his chest, something that felt unfamiliar and warm, definitely good. A feeling that was the exact opposite of his saddest song. It was the feeling of finally being found. The old oak tree became their sanctuary, a silent partner in the quiet friendship that blossomed between Annuli and Sua. Days turned into a comfortable, familiar routine. Annuli would arrive, her canvas bag bumping against her hip, and she'd find Sua already there, his guitar case leaning against the trunk like a faithful dog just waiting for its owner. They had their own unspoken spots under the tree. His was a smooth, sun-warmed patch of earth where the roots cradled him, and hers was a flatter piece of ground where the light was best for painting. Their conversations, once as brief and simple as the chirping of sparrows, began to stretch and deepen, woven in and out between the threads of his music and the strokes of her brush. One afternoon, as Annuli was adding the final highlights to a painting of a stormy, dramatic sky, Sua's playing slowed down to a complete halt. The silence felt heavy, charged with something he really wanted to say. He cleared his throat, a soft, nervous sound. "There is a thing," he began, his fingers tracing the shape of one of the guitar strings. "A small music festival in the plaza by the fountain this Saturday." Annuli looked up from her canvas, her brush just hovering in the air. "That sounds fun. Are you going to go watch it?" Sua shook his head no, his gaze still fixed on his instrument. "No, I'm going to play. One song. A song I made myself." He finally dared to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was so raw, it made Annuli's breath catch in her throat. "I was thinking, maybe you would want to come?" The question just hung there in the air between them. Annuli understood instantly that this was not just a casual invitation to hang out. This was him offering her a piece of his soul, the private, musical part of himself that he usually only shared with the trees and the squirrels. Her answer was immediate and beaming. "Sua, of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." The days leading up to the festival were just filled with a completely new kind of energy. Sua practiced his song with a focused intensity that she'd never seen before, and Annuli just listened, offering not criticism, but quiet encouragement. She stopped painting altogether during these practices, just sitting there and absorbing the music, watching the way his brow would furrow in concentration and his lips moved slightly, silently counting out the beats. She could feel the song changing, the sad, lonely edges just softening, replaced by a thread of something that actually sounded like real hope. Saturday finally arrived, warm and bright and sunny. The plaza was absolutely packed with people. A swirling, chattering crowd that made Annulai's head spin. She found a spot near the front of the stage, standing on her tiptoes to see over the sea of heads. When Sua walked onto the small wooden stage, he looked pale and stiff as a board, his knuckles white as he gripped his guitar tightly. The host announced his name, and a smattering of polite applause rippled through the audience. Sua looked out at the sea of faces, and for a terrifying moment, he seemed completely frozen in place. His eyes scanned the crowd, lost and panicked, until they finally found hers. Annulai didn't wave or shout or anything like that. She just looked right back at him, and she gave him the biggest, warmest, most believing smile she could possibly muster. It was a smile that said, "I see you. I am here for you. You can do this." He took a deep, visible breath, his shoulders relaxing just a little bit. He adjusted the microphone, nodded to the sound technician, and then he began to play. The song sounded different from how it sounded under the oak tree. Here, amplified and sent out into the open air for everyone to hear, it was fuller, braver, bolder. It started with that familiar lonely melody, the one that had first drawn Annulai to him. But then it swelled, building into something so powerful and beautiful. It was a story told without any words, a story of gray skies that slowly broke apart to let the sun shine through. As he played the final resonant chord, the plaza, which had been murmuring with sound just a moment before, fell completely silent for a second before erupting into genuine, enthusiastic applause. Sua gave a quick, formal bow, his eyes immediately searching for Annulai again. She was clapping harder than anyone else, her eyes shining with unshed tears, so incredibly proud of him that she felt like her heart might just burst right out of her chest. After all the performances were over, the crowd started to disperse and head home. They walked away from the noise of the plaza, finding their way to the quieter, lamplit paths that wound through the city gardens. The air was cool now, and a comfortable silence settled between them, both of them still living in the echo of his music. "It was perfect, Sua," Annulai said softly, breaking the quiet between them. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life." He shook his head, a humble gesture. "It was only because you were there. When I saw you, I remembered how to breathe again." As they walked, their hands swung gently at their sides, brushing against each other every now and then. The back of Annulai's hand accidentally brushed against the back of his. It was a tiny electric shock of contact. She expected him to pull away immediately, to retreat back into his shell of shyness, but he didn't do that. Instead, his fingers slowly, deliberately intertwined with hers. His hand was warm and slightly calloused from the guitar strings, and it held hers with a gentle firmness that felt like a promise of something. It was the very first time that they had held hands, and the simple act sent a wave of warmth rushing up Annulai's arm, flooding her entire body with a feeling of rightness, of safety, of belonging. They found a secluded wooden bench overlooking a small, dark pond. They sat down, their hands still linked together, and talked for what felt like hours, but also felt like just a single fleeting moment in time. He told her all about the pressure he felt from his family, about how music was his escape, but also his secret struggle and his secret passion. She told him all about her dreams of going to art school, her fears of not being good enough, of her paintings never really meaning anything to anyone but herself. They shared pieces of themselves that they had never shared with anyone else before. Their secrets felt safer in the dark, nestled in the space between their clasped hands. Eventually, it was time to go. They walked to the corner where their paths would eventually diverge and they'd have to say goodnight. The street lamp above them was casting a soft golden glow all around. They stopped walking, turning to face each other, their hands still unwilling to let go of each other. "Thank you for coming, Annulai," Sua whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for playing for me. she whispered back. He lifted his free hand, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every single chance to pull away if she wanted to. He gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with a touch that was so soft, it was almost like a breath of air. Annuli leaned into his gentle touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a second. He leaned in slowly, closing the small space between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was soft and sweet and over way too quickly. It was not a demanding kiss, but a question, a confession, a beginning of something. When he finally pulled away, the night air felt cool on her lips. They were both breathing a little faster, their hearts beating a frantic, joyful rhythm against their ribs. It was a very short kiss, but in that brief touch, they both felt the world shift beneath their feet, tilting onto a completely new, exciting, and terrifying axis that was full of nothing but endless possibility. The golden days that followed the music festival were the happiest days of their entire lives. The space under the old oak tree was no longer just a sanctuary for art and for music. It became a world of their own making, a special place where love grew as steadily and as strongly as the ancient roots beneath them. Their conversations were now punctuated by the easy touch of a hand, the simple comfort of a shoulder to lean on when you needed it. Sua's melodies lost their last traces of sadness, transforming into compositions that were vibrant and full of a quiet joy, mirroring the new colors, bright, hopeful yellows and deep, passionate reds that began to dominate Annuli's canvases. They were two separate melodies that had finally found a perfect harmony together. And for a beautiful, fleeting season, it seemed like summer would never ever end. The end, when it eventually came, was not loud or dramatic or explosive, but arrived in a hushed, heavy conversation one evening. Sua's voice was strained and tight as he explained that his father's work, a serious matter of family duty and responsibility, was calling them back to Korea. It wasn't just for a visit. It was a permanent move back home. The news landed between them like a physical weight, crushing the air right out of their lungs. The world, which had felt so expansive and full of promise just moments before, suddenly shrank to the size of a phone screen, a vast and terrifying ocean stretching out to separate them from each other. That night, under their tree, they just held each other in a tight embrace, not speaking at all, because there were no words big enough to hold the immense ache of the impending goodbye. The airport was a cold, bright place full of echoing announcements and fake, forced smiles all around. Their final hug was a desperate, tight embrace, a silent promise pressed into each other's shoulders. As Annuli watched his figure disappear through the security gate, a part of her soul felt like it was just being torn away from her, leaving a hollow, silent space behind. The first few months apart were definitely the hardest. The oak tree felt haunted by his ghost. The silence there was no longer peaceful. It was a loud, aching absence that she could feel deep in her bones. She tried to paint, but the colors all felt dull and muddy to her. Her inspiration just dried up like a creek in the middle of a long drought. But their love was a stubborn, resilient thing, not willing to just give up without a fight. They fought the distance with the only weapons that they had, determination and modern technology. Their lives became a patchwork of scheduled video calls filled with the fuzzy pixelation of a poor internet connection. They shared their days through a constant stream of messages, a picture of his rainy Seoul street, a voice note of her complaining about some difficult art project, a grainy video of him playing a new song fragment on his guitar. It was definitely not the same as being together. It could never be the same as sharing the same sunlight under their tree. There were moments of frustration, of a loneliness so profound that it felt like a physical illness. But then one of them would send a simple message, "I miss you," or play a few notes of their special song, and the connection would just snap right back into place, like a lifeline stretching across the vast world. Annuli, fueled by the memory of his belief in her, and the burning need to make their struggle actually mean something in the end, poured all of her emotion into her art. She painted through the loneliness. She painted through the doubt, creating a new series of works that were bolder and more emotional than anything she had ever done before in her life. Her hard work, her late nights, her tears dried right into the paint on the canvas. All of it culminated in one incredible opportunity: her first solo art show at a local gallery. The night before the opening, she stood in the bright white space, just looking at her paintings hanging on the wall. And there, right in the very center of everything, was the largest piece of all, a breathtaking portrait of her and Sua under their oak tree. His head resting gently on her shoulder, her hand intertwined with his, the dappled light making their skin just glow. It was a painting of pure, perfect happiness, and the ache of its memory was almost too much for her to bear. The opening night was a total whirlwind of faces and voices. The gallery was crowded with people, filled with the pleasant hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Annuli, dressed in a simple, elegant dress, moved through the crowd, smiling and accepting congratulations from everyone. But her heart was like a frantic bird, beating wildly against her ribs. She kept glancing towards the door, a foolish, hopeful part of her just waiting for a miracle to happen. As she stood before the central painting, explaining her inspiration to a small group of attendees, her voice was steady and calm, but inside she was crumbling into pieces. And this one, she said, her voice softening just a little bit, is about finding a quiet piece of forever when you least expect it to happen. Her words just trailed off into the air. A ripple of movement at the gallery's entrance caught her attention. The crowd seemed to part almost automatically, and for a moment, everything went completely silent. There, standing right in the doorway, his hair a little bit longer, his face a little bit thinner, but his eyes holding that same quiet intensity that she saw in her dreams, was Sua. Time just stopped completely. The crowd, the noise, the paintings all around her. Everything blurred into an indistinct haze. He walked slowly towards her, his gaze locked on hers, not even seeing anyone else in the entire room. He looked tired from his long journey, but his eyes were clear and full of a determined, unwavering love. He didn't say a single word. He simply walked right up to her in front of everyone there and got down on one knee. A collective gasp swept through the entire gallery. Annuli's hands flew up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with total disbelief. Sua didn't have a velvet ring box. Instead, he held up a simple, delicate silver chain. Dangling from it was not a diamond ring, but his most treasured possession, his worn-down guitar pick, the very one that he had used to play the song that brought them together in the first place. He looked up at her, his voice strong and clear, carrying through the silent room. Annuli, he began, his accent coloring her name like a sweet melody. My life only had one color before you came along. It was just a quiet gray song. You are the one who taught me how to see all the other colors in the world. You are the one who taught my heart how to sing again. This distance has been the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my life. But it only proved one thing to me. My home is not a country. My home is you, Annuli. He took a deep breath, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Will you? Will you promise to be my forever? Tears streamed down Annuli's face, happy, relieved tears that she didn't even try to hide. She looked from his hopeful, loving face to the guitar pick, a symbol of the very first day that they had met, and then to the painting on the wall that captured their love so perfectly. There was only one answer in the entire universe that she could give. Yes, she breathed out, her voice cracking with emotion, then louder, for everyone in the room to hear her. Yes, Sua, 1,000 times yes, I will. He stood up, his own tears finally escaping, and slipped the necklace right over her head. The cool metal of the pick rested gently against her skin, a permanent reminder of their song. He pulled her into his arms and they hugged, a long, tight embrace that spoke of all the lonely nights, all the missed conversations, and all the overwhelming joy of finally being whole again. The gallery erupted into applause and cheerful tears, but they hardly even heard it. They were completely lost in their own world, a world that was no longer separated by vast oceans or flickering screens, but was finally, completely, and forever united as one. If you were moved by Annuli and Sua's incredible journey from a quiet park bench to a forever promise, and you want to read even more stories about love that conquers distance and differences, be sure to subscribe for more. New chapters of unforgettable romance are always just a click away.